So for this think, pair, share activity, this is where you kind of work on a problem on your own. I'm showing this, down here at the bottom of the page with the answer to this problem right here, so you can try it on your own and see if you get this answer. I have the full solution down below. I tried pausing my recording and resuming my recording once already, and it didn't work. So I think this is the way I'm going to do it, where it's going to be a continuous recording. So at this point, you know what example we're working on, the think, pair, share, and you have the answer. At this point, pause the video yourself. And after you work this out, resume playing this video for the rest of the solution. So I already have the solution figured out. I'm just going to be going through my already worked out solution. So go ahead and pause now. Okay, so you've worked on it and you've come back. Now you're looking for the solution to this problem. So here we go. So let's read this problem. Together, a married couple earns $110,000 a year. The first spouse earns $16,000 less than twice what the second spouse earns. What does the second spouse earn? All right, so let's try and dissect the information here in this word problem. So the word together is a key word meaning plus. And so together, this couple earns $110,000 a year. That will be useful. And this problem is talking about a first spouse and a second spouse. And so first spouse, we don't know how much they make, so we can assign a variable to represent the amount that first spouse makes. And so I'm going to use a lowercase f to stand for first. And kind of reading on, they're also talking about a second spouse. And the second spouse is what we're trying to figure out down here on this last sentence. So I'm going to let lowercase s stand for the amount or the salary amount for the second spouse. Okay, so the first spouse earns $16,000 less than. So when I see $16,000 less than, I think subtract 16,000. Then it says twice. And so when I see the word twice, that's a key word for the number 2, twice what the second spouse earns. So I think that's going to be 2s. Okay, so these are all the different parts of this word problem that I've kind of identified. And so we're trying to figure out what the second spouse makes. So we need to solve for s. So like I just said, the first spouse we're going to label with a lowercase f, and the amount that the second spouse makes, their salary, is going to be a lowercase s. Now up above, I mentioned that it said together, the couple earns $110,000. So to me, that sounds like the amount the first spouse makes plus the amount that the second spouse makes is or equals 110,000. So this is one equation that we can use in this word problem. F plus S equals 110,000. Now, whenever you have two unknowns, you need two equations. If you've only got one equation and two unknowns, you're not going to be able to solve for both unknowns. Okay, so because we have two unknowns, that tells us we need to look for two equations. Now we've got one. And this one we could get just by reading the text. But the second one we're going to get by creating a visual. So this is our visual here. So unlike another kind of word problem with like snowfall, we could kind of imagine the ground and the snow accumulating on the ground. We don't have that here with salaries. Okay, but we can maybe think of this like a bar graph or a bar chart, where the bottom of the bar chart represents zero salary. So the very bottom is zero salary. And we can represent the height of this bar to be the amount that the first spouse makes. So the height of this bar is the amount that the first spouse makes. And so this distance from 0 up, we don't know what amount that is. We don't know the amount that the first spouse makes. Now, the second spouse, we don't know what the second spouse makes either. Okay, that amount above 0, we don't know. But what we do know from up above is that we're dealing with twice what the second spouse earns. So 2 times S. So that means we can take S and then we can add another amount that the second spouse makes on top of that. Okay. Now, from adding twice what the second spouse makes, so we're kind of stacking these two amounts the second spouse makes, we're going to take $16,000 less than that. So we're taking this amount of twice what the second spouse makes, and then we're dropping down 16,000. And what it tells us is that 16,000 less than twice what the second spouse earns is what the first spouse earns. So the first spouse, the amount that the first spouse makes, is equal to twice what the second spouse earns minus 16,000, which is this level right here. So using this visual, we know that the first spouse, the amount that they make, is equal to 2 times the second spouse minus 16,000. So the amount that the first spouse makes is equal to twice what the second spouse makes minus 16,000. And so this is our second equation that we can use. So now we've got 2 equations and 2 unknowns. So that's going to outfit us to be able to solve this word problem. But before we move on, let's kind of look at what our expectations are. So number 1, we expect that the amount that the first spouse and the second spouse make to both be positive. Okay, salaries are positive, they're not negative. So we expect those 2 numbers to be positive. And we also expect that the amount that the first spouse makes will be greater than the amount in the second spouse. And we can see that with this visual that we made here, that the amount that the first spouse makes is greater than the amount that the second spouse makes by themselves. So that's a second expectation. Okay, so let's move on to actually solving for F and S. So what we really need is to find the amount of the second spouse. So given that we've got 2 equations with 2 unknowns, we need to use both in order to get 2 solutions, to find what F is and to find what S is. So here's our first equation, or actually this was our second. F is equal to 2S minus 16,000. That was this one up above. And then our second equation was the amount of the first spouse plus the second spouse equals 110,000. And that was what we had up here at the top. So how do we use these 2 together? Well, this equation here on the left tells us that we can substitute F for this expression here to the right. So anywhere we find an F, we can put 2S minus 16,000 in its place. And that's kind of what I've done, is I've taken this expression and brought it over and substituted in to this other, this second equation. And so I substituted this value of F for the expression in the first equation. And since that first equation was in green, I also kept this substituted part in green for F. Okay, so Substituting in for F, we've got 2S minus 16,000 plus S equals 110,000. And so now I recognized that 2S and plus S are like terms. So those should add together to get 3S. Didn't do anything with the 16,000, so I left that alone. Didn't do anything with the 110,000, left that alone. So notice here now we have exactly one equation with one unknown, which is solvable, right? So now we just need to get S by itself. So I added 16,000 to both sides. And this canceled out 16,000 on the left. And 110,000 plus 16,000 gave me 126. Then I divided both sides by 3. And that gave me an amount for the second spouse. So that was 42,000. So I could technically stop there, but I want to go just a little bit more because I want to see if this amount fits our expectations. So this amount of the second spouse, we can now plug that into our first equation here and substitute that in for S. So since I wrote this in red, I put what I substituted S for also in red. So we have F is equal to 2 times 42,000 minus 16,000. And 2 times 42,000 gives us 84,000. And 84,000 minus 16,000 gives us 68,000 for the salary of the first spouse. So when we compare this with our expectations, number one, that both the salary of the first spouse and the second spouse are positive. Okay. And so when we look over here and we look over here, they are. So check. The second expectation is that the salary of the first spouse is greater than the salary of the second spouse. And so the salary of the first spouse was 68,000 and the salary of the second spouse was 42,000. 68 is greater than 42. So check, we're good there. So we should have really good confidence that our answer for S is correct. So now we can write our answer. The second spouse earns $42,000 per year. Let me know if you have any questions.